They all laughed when Alara married Silas, the mountain man. That fur-clad brute will leave you to starve, they mocked. Now deep winter grips Havenwood, famine reigns. As hope dies, Silas descends, revealing a shocking secret about his true wealth. The truth about his fortune changes everything. Alara had once known the soft certainty of comfort, the delicate rustle of fine silks, and the promise of a respectable match. But the tides of commerce were fickle, and her father's once thriving business had crumbled to dust, taking with it her dowry and her standing in the small, rigid society of Havenwood. Suddenly, the genteel smiles of her acquaintances turned to thinly veiled pity. Their invitations ceased, and the future she'd envisioned vanished like smoke. She was a pariah, a burden, a reminder of what could be lost. Her choices narrowed to a suffocating few until Silas, the mountain man, appeared on the edges of town, a hulking shadow against the backdrop of the towering peaks. He came to trade furs, his presence a stark contrast to the perfumed gentleman who once sought her hand. He spoke little, but his eyes held a depth she had never encountered, a quiet strength that offered something far more substantial than empty promises. Their courtship, if one could even call it that, was marked by the town's growing horror. How could a woman of her breeding consider such a union? Silas wore skins, smelled of pine and wood smoke, and owned nothing but the land he lived upon and the skill of his hands. He was, in their eyes, a pauper, a brute, a wild thing unfit for any proper woman. Yet Alara saw past the rough exterior, sensing a profound honesty, a freedom from the artifice that had suffocated her in Havenwood. The thought of escaping the incessant judgment, the endless pretense, began to bloom within her. A fragile hope in a barren emotional landscape. She chose him, not out of desperation for any man, but for the life he represented, a life untainted by the very greed that had ruined her family. Life in Silas's cabin was as unforgiving as the mountain itself. The air bit with a crisp, clean chill. The silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of the hearth or the distant call of an owl. Her hands, once accustomed to needlework and drawing, now learned the rough rhythm of chopping wood, preparing game, and maintaining the small, sturdy dwelling. Each trip to Havenwood was a gauntlet of whispers and sneers. The society wives would gather in hushed groups, their eyes trailing over her rough-spun dress, their words dripping with mock sympathy. "Poor Alara," they would murmur, "wasting away in that savage's den. We always said she'd come to no good. It'll end in misery, mark our words." Their words were meant to sting, to remind her of her folly, to break her spirit. But with each passing day, as Alara's muscles hardened and her spirit grew resilient, she found those predictions held less and less power over her. For while Havenwood saw only a wild man and his desperate bride, lost in a desolate wilderness, Alara was slowly beginning to see something else entirely. Silas was indeed a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He moved through the forest with a silent grace, reading the land like an open book. He knew the secrets of the ancient trails, the hidden springs, the medicinal properties of every root and leaf. His connection to the earth was not a sign of poverty, but a form of wealth that the men of the town, consumed by ledgers and coin, could never comprehend. He taught her to listen to the profound quiet, to respect the untamed strength of nature, and in doing so, he slowly began to fill the emotional void that the town's hollow ambition had left within her. She started to understand that this rugged existence was not a privation, but a profound freedom. What the town dismissed as primitive was, in truth, an intricate tapestry of survival and knowledge, far richer than any ledger entry. But even as Alara found a nascent peace in her new, challenging life, a storm brewed on the horizon, unseen by the complacent eyes of Havenwood. The coming winter, they said, would be a harsh one, a chilling prophecy that would test the very foundations of their gilded lives. And as the first flakes of snow began to fall, fine as sugar dust upon the distant peaks, a profound shift in destiny was already settling over their world, ready to reveal who truly held the keys to survival. and to a wealth far beyond mere gold. The mountains did not merely embrace winter that year, they devoured it with an insatiable hunger. Snow fell with a vengeance, thick as wool blankets, piling up day after relentless day until the world outside the small cabin became a monochrome landscape of white, an endless, shifting canvas of drifts and icy peaks. The air itself seemed to crackle with an arctic fury, stripping away warmth, sound, and hope. This was not merely a harsh season, it was a siege, a test of will against the indomitable power of the wilderness, and it descended upon Havenwood with a ferocity no one had anticipated. In the town below, the veneer of civility began to crack like ice on a shallow pond. Roads, once arteries of commerce, became impassable walls of white, isolating Havenwood from the outside world. The stores, filled with the promise of plenty, quickly dwindled, their shelves emptying faster than any merchant's ledger could track. Panic, a subtle and insidious poison, seeped into the hearts of the townspeople. It began with grumbles, escalated to accusations, and finally settled into a chilling fear as the reality of their isolation set in. The respectable gentlemen, so adept at negotiating prices and closing deals, found themselves utterly helpless against the raw, unyielding force of nature. Their gold, their properties, their finely tailored suits, none offered warmth or sustenance against the biting cold and the gnawing hunger. From their perch high above, Ilara and Silas watched the silent, slow suffocation of the town. Their cabin, though Spartan, was a bastion against the storm. Silas, the rough-skinned one, had prepared for months, his every action guided by an instinct honed over a lifetime in the wild. His stores of cured meats, dried berries, and neatly stacked firewood seemed endless, a testament to a wisdom that the town below had mocked. Ilara, no longer the fragile merchant's daughter, moved with a newfound efficiency, tending to the fire, mending worn clothes, her hands now calloused but capable. She had learned to read the subtle cues of the mountain, the way the wind shifted before a blizzard, the distant cry of a trapped animal, and the quiet, almost reverent way Silas spoke of the ancient trees. Yet, even in their sanctuary, the weight of the endless winter pressed down, a constant chilling presence. The true turning point arrived with the messenger, not a physical presence, for no one could traverse the frozen passes, but a desperate plume of smoke, visible on a rare, clear day from the highest ridge near their cabin. It was a signal, ancient and universal, born of dire need, rising from the heart of Havenwood. Silas stood gazing at it for a long, silent moment, his broad shoulders squared against the sky, his eyes, usually so stoic, betraying a flicker of profound conflict. He was a recluse by choice, a man who had sought refuge from the very society now signaling its desperate plea. Ilara felt the hesitation in him, a battle between his deep-seated independence and a silent moral compass that guided his solitary life. He had built his world beyond their judgment, yet a part of him remained bound by an unspoken code, an ancient debt to humanity itself. As Silas began to make preparations, pulling snowshoes from their hooks, readying his pack mules, Ilara observed him with a keen eye. He moved with purpose, but a faint unease seemed to cling to him, a shadow in his grim determination. He paused often, his gaze sweeping the horizon, studying the unnatural stillness of the air, the way the snow lay in strange, unbroken patterns, almost too perfect. He ran his calloused hand over an ancient map, not of routes and trails, but of celestial alignments and seasonal portents, passed down through generations of mountain folk, a map that whispered of cycles far older and more formidable than any calendar. He muttered words, almost to himself, about a grandfather's tale, a winter of profound silence that had come before, not just severe, but a reckoning. It was more than a harsh winter. It was an event that felt preternatural, something that resonated with ancient knowledge he carried, a part of his hidden fortune. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, a cold knot forming in her stomach, but she did not falter. She understood without words the depth of his resolve, the silent burden of knowledge that compelled him, her own past, filled with the hollow echoes of the town's greed and judgment, gave way to a new clarity. She would not be left behind. She would be his partner. With a quiet strength that surprised even herself, she began to gather supplies for the journey, packing medicines, extra blankets, dried rations. The fear was a cold companion, but it was overshadowed by a fierce loyalty, a profound trust in the man beside her. This was not an act of charity. It was a mission, a harrowing journey into the very heart of the storm, to save the very people who had once scorned them. The mountain howled its protest, a cacophony of wind and swirling snow, as Silas and Alara prepared to leave the sanctuary of their cabin. Their figures, small yet resolute, stood framed against the vast, unforgiving expanse of white. With a final glance back at the single point of light that was their hearth, they plunged forward, disappearing into the swirling white chaos, two souls swallowed by the blizzard, walking into the unknown, their fate intertwined with the struggling town below. The journey down the mountain was a brutal descent into the heart of the storm. Each step was a battle against the elements, the snow deep and treacherous, the wind a relentless, biting adversary that seemed to strip away all warmth and hope. Silas moved with the silent, deliberate grace of a creature born of the wild, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the drifts, his eyes scanning for unseen dangers. Alara, though physically taxed, kept pace, her resolve unyielding. She saw the mountain through new eyes, not as a desolate wasteland, but as a living, breathing entity, majestic and merciless. Every tree became a sentinel, every rock face a monument to enduring strength. They were no longer merely travelers. They were participants in an ancient, perilous dance. As they neared the outskirts of Havenwood, the signs of distress became more palpable. The usual sounds of the town, the distant bark of a dog, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, were swallowed by an unnatural silence, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind. Smoke plumed from only a few chimneys, thin and struggling against the oppressive cold, suggesting a dwindling supply of firewood and a growing desperation. The town, once so vibrant and self-assured, now lay trapped beneath a shroud of white, a ghost of its former self. It was a stark visual testament to the fragility of human constructs when confronted with the raw power of nature. The first few figures they encountered were not the proud, well-dressed townsfolk Alara remembered, but gaunt, bundled specters huddled near their homes, their faces pale with hunger and cold. Their eyes, once filled with judgment, now held a haunted, almost vacant look, quickly replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then a spark of desperate hope, as they recognized the formidable figure of Silas and the laden mules behind him. Whispers rippled through the frozen air. "It's the rough-skinned one, from the mountain." A strange mix of awe and shame painted their expressions. They had mocked him, ridiculed him, cast him out, and yet here he was, their improbable savior. Word of their arrival spread like wildfire through the besieged town. Soon, a small crowd began to gather at the edge of the market square, their initial skepticism giving way to a desperate curiosity. They saw the mules laden with supplies, sacks of grains, dried provisions, even bundles of medicinal herbs Alara had helped Silas collect. The air filled with a collective gasp of astonishment. Silas, the man they had branded a pauper, had brought them life. He moved through the crowd with quiet authority, his gaze unwavering, taking in the scene with a silent assessment. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a grim understanding of the dire situation. Among the crowd, Alara's father stood out, his once robust frame now shrunken and frail, his face etched with the ravages of hunger and illness. His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer filled with the disappointment she had known, but with a profound, aching humility. He recognized the provisions, the unmistakable bounty that only a man deeply connected to the land could provide. He saw his daughter, not the disgraced girl he had tried to marry off, but a woman transformed, standing strong and resolute beside her mountain husband. The silence between them was heavy, pregnant with unspoken apologies and dawning realizations. Silas, without a word, began to direct the distribution of supplies, his movements economical and efficient. He singled out the weakest, the children, the infirm, ensuring they received what they needed most. There was no demand for payment, no expectation of gratitude, only the quiet fulfillment of a profound, unspoken duty. The townsfolk, accustomed to transactions and bargaining, were bewildered by his selflessness. They had expected scorn, or at least a demand for recompense, but received only a stoic, life-sustaining generosity. As the immediate crisis of hunger was addressed, a new kind of tension settled over Havenwood. The people, now fed and temporarily safe from starvation, were faced with the stark reality of their future. The winter showed no signs of relenting, and their own provisions were almost entirely depleted. The question hung unspoken in the frigid air. What now? Their homes, once symbols of their success, felt like elegant prisons. They had nowhere left to turn. Then, a voice, raspy with cold and shame, finally broke the silence. It was Mayor Thompson, a man whose pompous declarations had often been directed at Silas. He stepped forward, his head bowed, offering a tentative plea for guidance. He spoke of the town's dwindling resources, of the increasing sickness, of their utter lack of knowledge about surviving such conditions. He confessed their helplessness, their ignorance, their desperate need for what Silas possessed. He did not beg for more provisions, but for wisdom, for a way to endure the long winter that still lay ahead. Silas listened, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. He had come to deliver sustenance, but the town now sought something more profound, a way of life, a connection to the very world they had dismissed. He knew the cost of living in harmony with the mountain, the constant vigilance, the hard work, the respect for nature's unyielding laws. He had offered refuge to Alara in his home, a sanctuary in exchange for her usefulness and respect for the rugged ways of that wild place. Now, he considered the desperate town before him. He would offer his guidance, his knowledge, his help to rebuild their shattered sense of security. But it would come with a condition, an unspoken price that demanded not coin, but a radical shift in perspective, a reckoning with their own arrogance. He would allow them to rebuild their lives, but only if they were willing to truly learn, to respect the earth, and to abandon the hollow values that had brought them to the brink. The initial days following Silas's arrival in Havenwood were fraught with a fragile tension. The townspeople, humbled by their dire circumstances, regarded him with a mixture of awe and residual suspicion. They ate the provisions he had brought, but their minds, still trapped in the old ways of profit and transaction, struggled to comprehend his selfless act. How could a man so reviled, so dismissed, possess such abundance and offer it without demand? It defied their every understanding of wealth and status. Alara moved among them, a silent testament to Silas's quiet strength, her presence a bridge between their two worlds. She understood their confusion, for she had once stood in their shoes, albeit from a different vantage point. Silas, however, did not wait for their full acceptance. He began to work. With a calm, unwavering authority, he assessed the town's vulnerabilities. He showed them how to build snow shelters for their livestock, how to ration their remaining resources with meticulous care, and how to identify safe, albeit difficult, routes through the snowdrifts to scavenge for firewood. He taught them methods of ice fishing, techniques for setting traps for small game, and the importance of preserving every scrap of food and every piece of fuel. His lessons were practical, immediate, and utterly essential for their survival. He did not lecture, he demonstrated, his hands moving with an practiced ease that conveyed more wisdom than any sermon. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the town began to adapt. The younger men, initially resentful of taking orders from the rough-skinned one, watched him fell trees with an effortless power, split logs with a single precise swing of his axe, and navigate the treacherous terrain as if it were his own backyard. They saw that his knowledge was not just about brute strength, but an intimate understanding of the forest's pulse. They saw Ilara beside him, no longer an outcast, but a woman who moved with purpose, her movements fluid and confident. She knew which herbs could soothe a cough, which poultices could draw out infection, and how to stretch a meager portion of grain into a nourishing meal. Her quiet resilience, once mocked, now earned her a growing, unspoken respect. Ilara's skills, dismissed in Havenwood society as mere domestic trifles, proved to be their unexpected salvation. Her ability to mend torn garments with meticulous precision meant the difference between frostbite and warmth. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs, gleaned from Silas and her own mother's forgotten lessons, became crucial as sickness spread through the community. She transformed the crude, barren town hall, now a makeshift infirmary, into a place of quiet comfort, its harsh corners softened by the warmth of her presence and the effectiveness of her simple remedies. She comforted the fearful, soothed the sick, and organized the women into a cooperative effort, teaching them how to stretch meager supplies and conserve dwindling resources. Where the men brought the raw materials, Ilara, with her inherent nurturing spirit, transformed them into sustenance and solace. One afternoon, as Ilara was distributing broth in the makeshift infirmary, she overheard a conversation between two of the town elders. They spoke of the mayor's dwindling hope, of how he had almost given up the week prior, believing all was lost. One of them recounted how Silas had found a hidden spring, far from any known trail, providing a crucial source of fresh water when all other wells had frozen solid. The other elder then revealed a detail that made Ilara's heart clench. He spoke of Silas not just as a skilled survivor, but as a man who knew the mountain's deepest secrets, a man whose family had guarded certain ancient passages for generations. He hinted that Silas possessed a kind of sight, an innate connection to the land that allowed him to predict the mountain's moods with uncanny accuracy, almost as if he spoke its language. This was not merely common knowledge, it was something passed down, a birthright, an almost mystical inheritance that went beyond mere survival skills. The revelation settled upon Ilara with a profound weight. Silas's fortune was not merely his knowledge, but a legacy, an almost spiritual connection to the very land they inhabited, a bond forged through centuries. It was a secret he carried, one that now began to explain the depth of his stoicism and his singular purpose. He wasn't just a mountain man, he was a guardian, an inheritor of ancient wisdom. As she looked around at the faces of the once proud townspeople, now humbled and dependent, she realized that Silas's true wealth lay not in gold, but in a heritage far more enduring, a power that could command the respect of the mountain itself. Just as a fragile sense of order began to emerge, a new shadow fell upon Havenwood. The remaining provisions, even with Silas's careful rationing, were nearing their end. One of the town's most prominent merchants, a man named Sterling, whose wealth had once been the envy of all, but whose arrogance remained unshaken even in adversity, stood up in the town square. His face, gaunt but still sneering, challenged Silas's authority, accusing him of hoarding resources, of leading them on a fool's errand with his primitive ways. He declared that they needed more than mere survival. They needed a way out, a path to real supplies, to the world beyond the mountain's icy grip. He demanded that Silas lead a dangerous expedition over the highest, most treacherous pass, convinced that true salvation lay in defying the mountain, rather than working with it. The fragile peace, the newfound respect, shattered in an instant, replaced by the chilling whisper of doubt and desperation. The audacious challenge thrown by Sterling hung heavy in the freezing air of Havenwood. His words, though born of desperation, struck a chord of fear and distrust among some of the townspeople, rekindling old prejudices against Silas. The high pass he spoke of was notorious, a labyrinth of shifting snow and treacherous ice, almost certainly impassable in such a winter. It was a route of last resort, a suicide mission. But Sterling's desperate plea for conventional salvation resonated with those who still clung to the illusion of civilization's superiority. Silas, the quiet mountain man, was faced with a stark choice: to defy his instincts and risk his life on a fool's errand, or to stand firm and risk losing the fragile trust he had begun to build. A somber silence fell over the small gathering, broken only by the whistling wind. Ilara watched Silas, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and unwavering faith. She knew the mountain better now, understood its capricious nature, and recognized the profound danger of Sterling's demand. She saw the conflict in Silas's eyes, the battle between his deep-seated wisdom and the urgent need to preserve lives, even those of his detractors. He chose not to argue but to act. With a decisive movement, he strode towards a large map spread out in the town hall, a map hand-drawn with intricate detail, charting not just known trails, but ancestral routes and seasonal game paths, a testament to his lineage. He pointed to a different route, a lower, less obvious pass, one that wound through a series of sheltered valleys and ancient caves, a path known only to his family. It was longer, more arduous, but infinitely safer than Sterling's reckless proposition. Sterling scoffed, dismissing the route as a wild goose chase. "Ancient passages. We need supplies, not fairy tales," he sneered. But before more doubt could take root, Alara stepped forward. Her voice, usually soft, now resonated with a quiet conviction. She spoke of the hidden spring Silas had found, of the herbs she had gathered from sheltered nooks, of the game he had tracked through seemingly impenetrable snow. She reminded them of the wisdom of working with the mountain, not against it. She appealed not to their logic but to their recent experiences, to the undeniable evidence of Silas's life-saving skills. Her words, calm and reasoned, carried a weight that even Sterling's bluster could not diminish. A murmur of agreement began to spread through the crowd. Still, Sterling persisted, his pride bruised, his desperation hardening into defiance. He challenged Silas to a contest. He would take a party over his chosen high pass, and Silas could take his ancient path. The first to return with significant provisions would prove their method superior. It was a reckless, dangerous gamble, a final attempt to assert his dwindling authority. Silas looked at Sterling, his gaze holding no anger, only a deep, weary understanding of human folly. He accepted. He would lead his own party, not to race, but to save lives. He chose a small group of the younger men, those who had shown the most willingness to learn, and Alara, whose presence had become indispensable. The days that followed were a blur of intense preparation. Silas meticulously planned their route, identifying potential hazards, caching emergency supplies, and teaching his small team the art of silent movement and efficient tracking. Alara packed medicinal herbs, extra layers of clothing, and carefully rationed their own small stores of food. She also packed a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a sentimental token from her mother, a silent prayer for their safe return. As they set out, leaving Havenwood once again enveloped in its frigid despair, a sense of quiet determination settled over their small group. The journey proved to be exactly as Silas had predicted. Long, challenging, but ultimately fruitful. They navigated through deep snowdrifts, found shelter in ancient caves, and tracked game in the silent frozen forests. Silas's intimate knowledge of the land was their compass, his quiet leadership their anchor. Alara, applying her growing wilderness skills, proved invaluable, her sharp eyes spotting forgotten trap lines, and her gentle hand tending to the inevitable scrapes and chills. They returned to Havenwood days later, a line of mules laden with provisions, dried game, sacks of precious grain from a forgotten settler's cache Silas knew of, and bundles of medicinal plants that would save many lives. They found Havenwood on the brink. Sterling's party had returned, diminished and frostbitten, empty-handed, having barely escaped with their lives from the treacherous high pass. The town was gripped by a renewed wave of illness and starvation. When Silas and Alara appeared, emerging from the swirling snow like figures from a legend, the relief that washed over the townspeople was palpable, profound, and utterly overwhelming. Their return was not just a delivery of provisions, it was a delivery of hope. Sterling, gaunt and defeated, could only stare, his arrogance utterly shattered by the undeniable evidence of Silas's wisdom. In the quiet aftermath, as the sick were tended and the hungry fed, Silas and Alara found a moment alone, warmed by the crackling fire of their shared cabin, having returned to its sanctuary as soon as their mission was complete. The air between them was thick with unspoken emotions, the raw intensity of shared peril and profound relief. Silas looked at Alara, his usually unreadable eyes softened by a warmth she had rarely seen. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, of his father, a man who had taught him the ways of the mountain, but whose spirit had been broken by the cruel indifference of the very town they had just saved. He confessed a deep-seated fear of connection, a solitary existence chosen to protect himself from the pain of betrayal. Alara, in turn, confessed her own wounds. The crushing weight of her father's disappointment, the hollowness of societal expectations, and the profound loneliness she had carried for so long. She spoke of how she had always sought acceptance, only to find it fleeting and conditional. As they spoke, sharing their deepest vulnerabilities, the firelight danced across their faces, illuminating not just their past traumas, but the nascent understanding that now bound them. They were two outcasts, one forged by the mountain, the other by the crucible of society's scorn, who had found in each other a solace, a profound partnership that transcended words. The shocking truth was not some external event, but the raw, honest revelation of their individual pain, which now, strangely, sealed their bond. The following morning, a small group of townsfolk, led by Alara's father, approached the cabin. They brought offerings, carefully preserved jars of honey, a warm, hand-knitted shawl, a sturdy pair of boots. There was no longer any demand, no accusation, only a silent, profound gratitude. They understood now. Silas was not just a rescuer, he was a teacher. Alara was not just his wife, she was a beacon of resilience. Their act of heroism had transcended the immediate crisis, planting the seeds of a deeper transformation within Havenwood. But as the town's immediate needs were met, a new, unsettling question began to stir. The winter was far from over, and the resources they had brought back, though vital, were not infinite. The long-term survival of Havenwood and the continuation of Silas and Alara's hard-won peace still hung precariously in the balance. After the harrowing expedition and the subsequent healing of Havenwood, a fragile calm settled over the mountain and the town below. The biting winds of winter still howled, but within Silas and Alara's cabin, a warmth had taken root, far deeper than the crackling fire on their hearth. The raw confessions shared in the aftermath of their ordeal had stripped away the last vestiges of pretense between them, forging a bond of profound understanding and mutual respect. They moved together with an unspoken rhythm, their lives intertwined in a dance of labor and companionship that transcended the simple acts of survival. Alara discovered a quiet joy in the rhythm of their days. She learned to identify the myriad barks and calls of the forest animals, to track their movements, and to recognize the subtle changes in the mountain's temperament. She helped Silas cure hides, prepare game, and gather the scarce but vital resources the winter still offered. In the evenings, by the soft glow of the fire, they would often sit in comfortable silence, or share stories, he of the mountain's ancient secrets, she of the fleeting beauty of a world he rarely touched. She found herself truly listening to the land, not just hearing its sounds, but understanding its language. The silence that once felt isolating now felt like a profound embrace. Silas, in turn, found himself unexpectedly softened by Alara's presence. Her laughter, a sound as rare and pure as mountain spring water in winter, brought an unfamiliar light into his solitary world. Her gentle touch, her quiet observations, and her unwavering loyalty chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. He saw her not just as a capable partner, but as the beating heart of the home they were building together. The cabin, once a mere shelter, had transformed under her influence into a true sanctuary, filled with the faint scent of dried herbs, the warmth of knitted blankets, and the undeniable presence of a shared life. The town below, though still struggling, had begun to look to Silas and Alara not with scorn, but with a nascent reverence. Alara's father would make the arduous trek up the mountain every few days, bringing small tokens of gratitude and offering to help with chores, his eyes now reflecting genuine admiration and a profound sense of paternal pride. The younger men Silas had led on the expedition now revered him as a mentor, seeking his advice on hunting, tracking and understanding the mountain's lore. The transformation was slow but undeniable. The seeds of mutual respect had begun to sprout in the frozen soil of Havenwood. One evening, as Alara was mending Silas's worn buckskin jacket, her fingers brushed against a small, rough-hewn wooden amulet tucked into an inner seam. It was intricately carved with symbols she vaguely recognized from Silas's maps, ancient patterns that spoke of earth and sky. As she gently pulled it free, Silas, seeing her discovery, grew quiet. He explained that it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of his ancestors, guardians of the mountain. Each symbol represented a different aspect of their inheritance: knowledge of the land, respect for its creatures, and a sacred duty to protect its hidden places. He then revealed a truth that resonated deep within Alara. His family, he explained, had once been the quiet benefactors of this very region, long before Havenwood existed, guiding lost travelers and offering aid to those who respected the mountain. Her own family, he mused, though merchants by trade, had also once served a similar role, not of wealth but of connection, through their ancestral knowledge of ancient trade routes and forgotten way stations, ensuring safe passage between communities. He spoke of an old, tattered journal he had found among his father's things, detailing a time when their families, though different in their paths, had unknowingly shared an ancient, almost forgotten lineage rooted in the stewardship of this very land. Their lives, it seemed, had always been destined to converge, two ancient lines, guardians of different aspects of the wilderness, now brought together by fate and the harsh hand of winter. The bond between them, once forged in necessity and shared vulnerability, now deepened into a profound sense of destiny, a feeling that they were not just individuals but the continuation of a legacy. Their hard-won peace, however, was not destined to last. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of thaw and renewed life, it also brought a subtle, unsettling shift in the wind. Silas, with his innate connection to the mountain, grew restless. He noticed unusual tracks on the periphery of their territory, heard distant sounds that were not of the wild. He spoke of a faint, acrid smell carried on the changing breeze, something unnatural, alien to the pristine mountain air. The ancient warning signals he had inherited from his ancestors, subtle shifts in the behavior of animals, strange patterns in the melting snow, all pointed to one undeniable truth. A new, external threat was approaching, a danger that stemmed not from nature's indifference, but from man's calculated malice. The sanctuary they had built, the home they had created, was once again about to be tested. The subtle signs that troubled Silas soon grew into undeniable portents of danger. The mountain, usually quick to shed its winter cloak with the arrival of spring, seemed to hold its breath. The wildlife, usually bustling with renewed energy, moved with an uneasy skittishness. Silas found tracks that were too heavy for deer, too deliberate for wolves, the distinct imprint of men, and too many of them, heading purposefully towards their isolated valley. The acrid smell he had sensed sharpened, carrying the faint tang of old wood smoke mixed with something metallic, something that spoke of distant, harsh industry rather than the clean air of the wild. The threat was clear. The past, Ilara's past, had finally caught up to them. Word of her survival, of her life with the rough-skinned one, had somehow filtered down from the desperate tales of Havenwood. Her father's fleeting visits, the gratitude of the town, had inadvertently drawn unwanted attention. The men who now tracked them were not mere desperados or curious travelers. They were the remnants of her father's creditors, ruthless men who believed Alara was still a valuable asset, a pawn to be married off to repay debts, or perhaps worse, men seeking to exploit the newfound wealth of the mountain man who had so generously saved Havenwood. They saw Silas not as a savior, but as a foolish simpleton who possessed valuable resources, and a woman they considered property. As the days passed, the incursions grew bolder. They found crude markers on trees near their territory, silent threats meant to intimidate. A trap they had set for game was tampered with, not to steal the catch, but to send a clear message. Silas moved with a renewed intensity, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his movements sharper, more guarded. He was no longer just the mountain man. He was a sentinel, fiercely protective of the fragile peace they had forged, and of the woman who had brought light into his solitary world. His quiet strength transformed into a formidable resolve, a dangerous edge that had been dormant for too long. Ilara felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She recognized the methods, the ruthless efficiency of men who saw people as commodities. She remembered the suffocating weight of her father's debts, the desperate attempts to marry her off, and the crushing judgment of society. She had escaped that world, built a new one with Silas, founded on principles of integrity and mutual respect. Now, that old world, with its avarice and cruel entitlement, was threatening to tear it all apart. The thought of losing Silas, of being dragged back into a life where she was merely a bargaining chip, filled her with a desperate, burning resolve. She would not be a victim again. Silas, sensing her fear, but also her renewed strength, began to prepare their defense. He knew the mountain was their greatest ally. He set up intricate warning systems, not with bells or shouts, but with the subtle dislodging of stones, the careful placement of dry leaves that would rustle at the slightest disturbance. He taught Ilara how to navigate the hidden passages and defensive positions he had carved out over decades, secret nooks in the rock face that offered vantage points and safe havens. They were ready to fight, not with brute force, but with the cunning and patience of the mountain itself. One tense morning, as the first rays of dawn touched the highest peaks, the inevitable arrived. 3 figures emerged from the dense tree line, hard-faced men with the cold, calculating eyes of predators. They carried axes and rifles, their movements slow and deliberate, designed to inspire fear. At their head was a man Ilara instantly recognized. Bartholomew Finch, her father's most ruthless creditor, a man whose ambition was as boundless as his cruelty. He had come not to negotiate, but to seize. He called out Ilara's name, his voice echoing through the silent valley, asserting his claim as if she were a lost piece of property. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and the approaching men, his towering figure a defiant barrier. He held no weapon, but his presence alone was a warning. Finch, however, was undeterred. He spoke of Ilara's debts, of her father's broken promises, of the legal claims that bound her. He even hinted at a greater prize, a hidden mine he believed that Silas surely possessed, given his inexplicable wealth of resources. Finch had not just come for Ilara. He had come for everything. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a shadow detached itself from the deeper woods, emerging with a quiet, unsettling grace. It was a 4th man, smaller, more agile, and clad not in the rough furs of a trapper, but in the dark, weathered clothes of an outlaw. His face was obscured by the low brim of his hat, but his eyes, when they met Finch's, held a flicker of cold amusement. He carried a bow and quiver, his movements suggesting a deadly efficiency. He was known only as the Shadow Walker, a notorious scout who led raiding parties through the treacherous borderlands, a man whispered to be as elusive and dangerous as the mountain cougar. He was Finch's unexpected accomplice, hired to track and subdue Silas, a man whose reputation as an unshakable guardian of the mountains was known even in distant, lawless territories. This was no longer just a confrontation with greedy creditors. It was a deadly dance with experienced, dangerous men. Ilara knew, in that heart-stopping moment, that she could not allow Silas to face this danger alone, nor could she let their sanctuary be destroyed. She had found a home, a true home for the first time in her life. She would protect it and the man who had shown her its meaning, at any cost. With a sudden, desperate surge of courage, she stepped out from behind Silas, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. Her voice, clear and strong, cut through the tense silence. She would go with them, she declared, on one condition. They would leave Silas in their home untouched. It was an act of profound sacrifice, a desperate gamble to buy time, to protect the man she had come to love, and to save the peace they had so arduously built. Her decision hung in the cold, still air, a desperate offering made in the face of insurmountable odds. Ilara's offer of surrender hung in the biting mountain air, a desperate gambit to protect Silas and their home. Bartholomew Finch, momentarily stunned by her defiance, quickly regained his composure, a smirk spreading across his cruel face. He saw it as a victory, another debt settled. The Shadow Walker, however, remained silent, his gaze shifting between Ilara and Silas, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Silas, his face a mask of grim determination, made no move. He understood the profound sacrifice Ilara was making, but also knew the depth of her resolve. He would honor her choice, but only for a moment, to observe their intentions, to choose his ground. As Ilara was roughly escorted away by Finch's men, Silas watched her go, his heart a cold knot of fury. His mountain-trained senses were alive, charting every movement, every subtle shift in the wind, every telltale sign of their path. He knew the hidden trails, the secret vantage points, the treacherous ice bridges that the city men would never perceive. This was his territory, his sanctuary, and they had dared to desecrate it. His earlier restraint dissolved into a fierce primal need to protect what was his. Finch and his men, burdened by their arrogance and their prisoner, made slow progress down the mountain, believing their victory complete. They chose the most direct, albeit dangerous path, eager to be rid of the harsh wilderness. The Shadow Walker, however, moved with a different gait, his eyes constantly sweeping the terrain, a silent wariness about his every step. He was a predator, but one who understood the dangers of the hunt. He knew they were not alone. Silas, a ghost in his own domain, moved with terrifying efficiency. He did not engage in a direct confrontation. Instead, he used the mountain itself as his weapon. He dislodged small avalanches of snow and ice, creating sudden, terrifying obstacles that slowed Finch's progress and sowed panic among his men. He knew the precise spots where the ground was weakest, where a single misstep could lead to a perilous fall. His actions were not random acts of violence, but calculated strikes, designed to disorient, to exhaust, and to separate the enemy. The confrontation truly began in a narrow, ice-bound ravine, a place of echoing silence and chilling shadows. Finch's men, unnerved by the constant, unseen attacks, were already on edge. The Shadow Walker, however, moved ahead, his bow drawn, his senses heightened. He was prepared, knowing the mountain man would strike. But Silas, anticipating his move, did not attack the scout. Instead, he targeted the weakest link, the pride and inexperience of Finch's men. With a series of carefully orchestrated maneuvers, he drove two of them into a treacherous ice patch, their panicked cries echoing as they struggled, their weapons lost to the snow. Finch, enraged, finally realized the depth of the trap they had walked into. He ordered his remaining man to cover him, while he advanced on Ilara, holding her as a shield, believing she was Silas's vulnerability. "Come out, mountain man," he roared, "or the woman pays the price." But Silas did not respond with words. Instead, Ilara, remembering the lessons Silas had taught her, the subtle ways to use the environment, saw her opportunity. As Finch tightened his grip, she remembered a small, loose rock near a particular ice formation. With a sudden, forceful thrust of her foot, she dislodged it, sending a cascade of smaller rocks and ice shards rattling down the narrow pass. The noise, amplified in the confined space, startled Finch, causing him to stumble and loosen his hold. In that split second, Ilara pulled free, scrambling away. Silas, seeing Ilara safe, emerged then, not from above but from a hidden crevice in the rocks, his figure looming large and menacing. He did not rush, but moved with a terrifying calm towards Finch. The remaining man with Finch panicked, fired a wild shot that went wide, and then turned to flee, disappearing into the swirling snow, leaving Finch utterly alone. Finch, now truly terrified, raised his rifle, but Silas was too swift. With a powerful, practiced movement, he disarmed the man, tossing the rifle into a deep snowdrift. He did not strike Finch. Instead, he held the man by his lapels, his face inches from Finch's, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "This mountain," Silas rumbled, his voice low and dangerous, "protects what is its own, and she is mine. Her family is mine. You will leave and you will never return." He released Finch, letting him fall, a humiliated heap in the snow. As Finch scrambled to his feet, a broken, defeated man, the Shadow Walker reappeared, his bow still drawn, aimed not at Silas, but at the fleeing figure of Finch's last man. He looked at Silas, then at Alara, a strange glint in his eyes. He had witnessed the mountain's power and the mountain man's strategic mastery. With a silent nod, a gesture of unexpected respect, he turned and melted back into the shadows of the ravine. Choosing to disappear rather than continue a fight, he now understood to be futile. He would not be the mountain man's enemy, nor his ally, simply a witness to his undeniable strength. Finch, defeated and terrified, stumbled away, a broken figure consumed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The threat was vanquished, not by brute force alone, but by a profound understanding of the land, a fierce, unwavering protection, and the unexpected cunning of two souls united. The immediate danger had passed, but the air still hummed with the echoes of confrontation. Silas and Alara stood together in the silent ravine, the enormity of what had transpired settling around them. The mountain had been their battlefield, their protector, and their silent witness. Yet even as the immediate threat receded, the chilling reality remained. The world beyond their mountain sanctuary was still a place of greed and danger, and though Finch was defeated, the insidious nature of such men lingered, a constant reminder of the vigilance required to protect their hard-won peace. The fight for their future was won, but the need to guard it would forever remain. The seasons turned, as they always do, healing the scars left by winter's fury and man's folly. A year passed, then another, bringing with them the gentle warmth of summer and the crisp bounty of autumn. Havenwood, humbled but transformed, had found a new equilibrium. The whispers of the rough-skinned one had faded, replaced by quiet reverence. The townspeople, taught by necessity, had learned to live more simply, to respect the cycles of nature, and to value resilience over riches. They sought Silas's counsel not out of desperation, but out of a genuine desire for wisdom. Alara's father, a man reborn, had become a quiet advocate for the mountain way, helping to foster a new understanding between the town and the wilderness. Up on the mountain, in their secluded cabin, Silas and Alara had built a life that was both serene and vibrant. The rough-hewn structure, once a testament to a solitary existence, now hummed with the warmth and love of a thriving home. The scent of pine and wood smoke mingled with the sweet aroma of baking bread and dried herbs. Alara, her hands skilled and her spirit free, moved with an easy grace, her laughter echoing through the small space. Silas, still a man of few words, found his peace not in isolation, but in the shared quietude, in the profound connection he now held. He no longer carried the burden of past betrayals. Ilara's unwavering loyalty had healed those ancient wounds. One golden afternoon, bathed in the soft light filtering through the cabin window, Alara sat by the hearth, a tapestry of intricate mountain flora growing beneath her nimble fingers. Her figure, no longer slight, was beautifully rounded with the undeniable promise of new life. She smiled, a radiant, contented expression, as Silas entered, carrying a basket heavy with wild berries. He set it down, then knelt beside her, his rough hand gently resting on her swelling abdomen. His eyes, once so guarded, were now alight with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The sanctuary was not merely a home, it was a cradle, preparing to welcome a new generation into the heart of the mountain. In that moment of quiet domestic bliss, Ilara's gaze fell upon a small, leather-bound journal that Silas kept on a shelf nearby. It was the same journal he had mentioned, found among his father's belongings, detailing the ancient connections between their families. As she reached for it, Silas gently took her hand. He explained that his father, in his later years, had not only documented the mountain's secrets, but had also meticulously transcribed the oral histories of their ancestors. revealing a lineage that stretched back further than anyone in Havenwood could imagine. Their family was not just mountain folk. They were the descendants of ancient guardians, tasked with protecting a network of forgotten, mineral-rich lodes, not for personal gain, but to ensure the prosperity of the hidden trading routes that crisscrossed the mountains. And then Silas revealed the final astonishing truth. Ilara's own mother, a woman he had never met, was descended from a complementary lineage, a family whose wealth had not been in gold or land, but in their rare knowledge of geology and ore identification. Their families, though separated by generations and circumstance, had been destined to unite, to combine their unique knowledge and ensure the preservation of a sacred, hidden trust. Her mother's subtle wisdom, her quiet understanding of the earth, was not merely inherited. It was a birthright, a dormant legacy that had now awakened. Their union, mocked by the town as a marriage of desperation, was, in truth, the fated convergence of two ancient, powerful lines, destined to protect the true, enduring wealth of the mountains. The hidden fortune was not merely Silas's, but theirs, a shared inheritance of knowledge, stewardship, and a profound connection to the land. The sun dipped below the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the valley, but within the cabin, a new light had dawned. Ilara and Silas were no longer just two outcasts who had found each other. They were the continuation of a powerful, ancient legacy, guardians of a wisdom far older than any town. The child growing within Ilara was not just their offspring, but the heir to a hidden fortune unlike any other. A fortune measured not in gold, but in the enduring strength of the earth, the profound silence of the mountain, and the unbreakable bonds of a family forged in adversity. The tale of the humble mountain man and his resilient bride echoed through the valleys, transforming from a jest into a powerful legend. It became a story whispered by campfires and retold in quiet homes, a testament to the fact that true strength is found not in conquest, but in connection. That home is not a place of brick and mortar, but a feeling of belonging fiercely protected. And that the richest among us are not those who accumulate the most, but those who understand that life's most precious treasures cannot be bought, but are forged in the crucible of love, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of the wild. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.